A few thoughts about chapter 5, and then we're going to focus on the last article, Spelman's Politics of the Mind Body Problem. There's no question in my mind but when I am thinking, there's electrochemical activity happening in my brain, and that's a physical thing. Um, the problem is, how's that related to my thinking? Uh, it seems to me that the thoughts I'm having are somewhat distinct from the electrochemical processes in my brain. Now, those processes may be causing the thoughts, or at least they're the physical component of the thought. But the thought itself, it in my mind at least, is somewhat different. And that's what people like Nagel and Strawson are trying to articulate, that our experience is not just sensory experience, seeing, hearing, touching, but that there is a cognitive element to it. And to tie into Nagel a little bit, he talks about what's it like to be a bat. I've not been around bats very much. To me, the way of getting at this is, what is it like? Would it be like to be my dog? What is my dog thinking? And if you have pets, sometimes we feel like we have some understanding, and sometimes I have no idea why she does what she does. I have no idea what's going on in her head. Um, it seems to me that I can't get past a certain element of dualism. Um, that there is the physical, but there's also something else. Um, we all use behaviorism in raising our children. We reward them with praise or something. When they do what we want them to do, we and we give them negative rewards. We punish them when they do what we don't want them to do. So we're trying to shape their behavior. But as your textbook points out, it seems to me that behaviorism makes sense when we're talking about someone else, but not as much when we're talking about ourselves. Um, what's going on in my head is more than just my actions, my behaviors. There's the element of consciousness. And we're going to be, in this chapter and in the next, we're going to be trying to make some sense of that consciousness. And I freely admit I don't think anybody's completely figured that out. I certainly haven't. Um, but there is the experiential element. I am experiencing. I am consciously thinking in ways that make it challenging, I think, to avoid some kind of idea of mental um, activity. that I don't find any of the rejections of dualism to be entirely satisfactory, even though I also don't think that Cartesian dualism is entirely satisfactory either. Um, it's a problem. That's why it's not been resolved. Now, what I want to focus on is Spelman's critique of Plato, in which she attributes, I think justifiably, to Plato the dualism of body and we tend to say mind. Plato said soul. Psyche, which, by the way, is where we get our word psychology. And Plato firmly separates the two. And she also, in his discussion of forms or ideas, those are perceived with the mind, the intellect, not with the senses that are associated with the body. And she also notes throughout the article that Plato consistently values the intellectual, or some would say the spiritual, over against the physical, and that Plato is also the source for the Western stereotype of associating masculine men with the intellectual and women with the physical, the irrational. And so that this is this distinction between mind or soul on the one hand and body on the other, between the rational and the irrational, has been inextricably linked with the dichotomy of gender, male and female, and the devaluing of women that goes along with that. And so in her mind, to summarize the argument so far, the soul-body distinction is integral to the rest of Plato's views. Must be conceded. Integral to the soul-body distinction is the higher worth and importance of the soul in comparison to the body, and that has historically been the case as well. Finally, Plato tries to persuade his readers that it is to one's peril that one does not pay proper attention to one's soul. For if one doesn't, one will end up acting and living as if one were a woman, and the implication, of course, is that's a bad thing. Her point, I think, at minimum, is that we need to be careful if we're going to hold to some kind of dualistic view of humans as mind and body, that we do not in so doing, first of all, associate the mind or the soul, whichever word you want to use, with the masculine element and the body with the feminine. First of all, it seems to me that association is just plain false. Men are as physical as women are. And women can be as intellectual as men are capable of being. Um, so, and I would point out that this association has also been used, at least since the time of Plato's pupil Aristotle, to try to legitimize the subjection of some ethnic groups by others. That wasn't done on the basis of what we would call race in ancient Greece. For the Greeks, anybody whose native language wasn't Greek was a barbarian, and so, in Aristotle's view, were natural slaves. Um, but it certainly was used and has been used in America, because racism, in the way that we use the word, is actually an American invention. Um, it's only in America that slavery was legitimized by a theory that some people, based on their skin color, were inherently less fully human than others. Um, all the ancient world had slavery in some form, but it was not based on the color of a person's skin. Um, it was based on a class view. Some people were inherently more valuable than others based on their socioeconomic status. It was based on nationality. Um, the Greek versus barbarian. But that's not the same thing we mean by race. That association with skin color, and so what we call racism today, is actually an American invention used to attempt to legitimize the enslavement of first Native Americans and then Africans by Europeans. And so racism in that sense is only about 500 years old. We need to be careful about those kind of stereotypes, because they do have consequences. If we associate one gender or one ethnicity with mind, and another with the physical body, then we are legitimizing some form of prejudice. And I think that that we, at the very minimum, need to be very wary of that. And it seems to me that that's at least part of her point, that this dualism of mind and body has historically been used to justify, to legitimize the devaluing of women and male dominance over women. I'm adding that it has also been used to legitimize the dominance of white people over people of color. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the mind-body dualism is false, as your author points out. But it does mean that there is danger in how we conceive of these things. And I think that danger comes when we associate one group of people with mind and another group of people with body, because it seems to me that that's inherently not only false but obviously dangerous. It's false because, as I suggested, whichever group you are privileging is in fact as physical as the other group, and the group that you are deprivileging, if that's a word, is as capable in the intellectual realm as any other. Um, it's certainly my observation that when it comes to intelligence, some people are smarter than others. But I haven't noticed that being drawn along either gender lines or racial lines. Rather, I think it's individual differences, not group differences. I'm I'm quite resistant to the idea of saying that that one group of people, whether we group them by gender, by nationality, by skin color, by whatever, is somehow different from other people. My observation is that people are people, and while there certainly is individual variation, um, I'm just very, very skeptical of anybody who wants to say that one group of people is somehow inherently superior or inferior to another group. That uh, that always rubs me the wrong way. I hope it rubs you the wrong way, because I think that way of thinking is very, very dangerous.